And ladies and gentlemen, the US-Iran conflict has reignited with a fragile truce now firmly over. Just today, after President Trump warned of fresh action, the US military says it has struck nearly 90 targets across Iran. CENTCOM has released strike footage saying the operation targeted air defense systems, missile and drone sites, naval assets and military infrastructure along Iran's coastline. Iran has hit back, claiming attacks on US military facilities in Bahrain and Kuwait, while Tehran has warned Washington that bullying and broken promises will come at a cost. Now let's try and summarize the US-Iran escalation since Iran first attacked 3 commercial vessels crossing Hormuz on July 6th and 7th, as the US has been talking about. This is, of course, the anatomy of a ceasefire collapsing, because Trump then declared that the truce is over. The US has blamed Iran for violating the Memorandum of Understanding, or the deal that had been struck earlier. Iranian oil sales license has now been revoked. Fresh US strikes that have been seen both yesterday and today morning on Iran. CENTCOM hitting more than 80 military targets. Iran's radar sites, Iran's air defenses have all been hit. Explosions have been reported in key coastal cities as well. Iran hits back at the US as well and has rained missiles and drones at US bases. Bahrain and Kuwait have been placed on high alert as a result of these attacks and the global impact, where oil prices have surged nearly 6%. The Strait of Hormuz has been disrupted once again, raising questions of oil supply chains. And now the US President Donald Trump has claimed that Iran is desperate for a deal with the United States, but they are not in any mood to strike a deal at the moment. On the other hand, Iran has made it clear that they will not respond with dialogue, but with action. Here's how the war of words has played out. Now, this is US President Donald Trump saying that Iran reached out and wants to make a deal. Iran has seen Abbas Araghchi come out to say that we don't answer vulgarity with vulgarity, but with action. Donald Trump has also come out to say that Iran is acting this way because they are crazy. Iran says that Iran is acting, or Abbas Araghchi says Iranians are known for their civility and culture. J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, says that if they try to close Hormuz, there's going to be a response. To which Araghchi has responded saying that threatening Iran does not diminish its greatness. US CENTCOM has come out to say that the strikes to degrade Iran's ability to threaten freedom of navigation. Again, Foreign Minister Araghchi has said that we answer with action, fearlessly and with valor. Now, what exactly started this fresh offensive from both sides? Well, it started with Iran attacking 3 ships passing by the Strait of Hormuz to enforce its own designated shipping lanes and reject a rival transit corridor. Let's explain this to you in a little bit of more detail. What are we talking about? These are the areas where the traffic has been attacked. And that's where you see the outbound traffic as well as the inbound traffic that is coming in from the Strait of Hormuz. The entire area over here is the IRGC restricted area. However, the fact that the attack took place over here, closer to Oman, has raised the hackles of the United States, saying that's Iran that has actually violated the terms of the Memorandum of Understanding. Iran says that this is area that is covered as far as the Memorandum of Understanding is concerned, because Iran believes that it has control over the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the United States has intensified its offensive on Iran. It struck several crucial cities in the southern part of the country. Take a look at this. Which are these cities? There's, of course, Bushehr. There is Chabahar as well. We're seeing Just being attacked, Sirik, Abu Musa, Iran Sheher and Bandar Abbas amongst the areas of Iran that have very clearly been attacked. So what's Donald Trump's strategy and his endgame? While Donald Trump has been one of the most unpredictable figures in global politics, if there's one man who may know a thing or two about how he operates, it is his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton, someone who spent quite some time with Donald Trump himself in the war room. Earlier today, I spoke to John Bolton about what he reveals in terms of what we can expect going forward. Listen into this. Joining us for more on the situation in West Asia is Mr. John Bolton. He's a former National Security Advisor of the United States. Many thanks, Mr. Bolton, for speaking to Times Now. My first question to you, are we now back to square one as far as the war in West Asia is concerned, in your view?
Well, I think in terms of the Strait of Hormuz, we probably are, but I think it's important to understand just how much damage was done to Iran's military-industrial complex during the strikes back in March and April, and has set the institutions of state power in Iran back a long way. I think the current situation in the Strait of Hormuz is unacceptable. I think it's clear that the Iranian government can't come to a common position. It may have people who negotiate with the U.S. Representatives to come up with this MOU. Nobody has given the word to the Revolutionary Guard that they're supposed to abide by the agreement. So this is a fundamental problem inside Iran, caused in part, a substantial part, I think, by the U.S.-Israeli attacks. The top leadership's been decimated, and the government isn't functioning like a normal government.
Right. So this is a very important point that you made as far as the MOU is concerned, because, you know, when it was signed between Iran and the United States, many had raised questions about whether it would last a distance at that point of time. But do you feel that the MOU's wording particularly is vague, which leaves it open to interpretation for each side, US or Iran, which could be quite different?
Well, exactly. It also kicks the key issues like the nuclear program down the road. There hasn't been anything except the lowest level consultations on it. Obviously, no progress on such an important issue. And this is entirely a benefit to the regime in Iran. Every day they gain to pick themselves up after the attacks earlier this year and continue to sell oil on international markets since the U.S. blockade has been lifted is a benefit to them. It doesn't help the U.S. It doesn't really help international petroleum markets, doesn't help the Gulf Arabs or peace and stability in the region.
Absolutely. And, you know, as we all know, Trump's reasoning for resuming hostilities is this very aspect that we're discussing, that Iran's not doing its part by opening up of Hormuz and the attacks on those ships that are transiting the oil choke point. So in that sense, does he have a rationale enough to justify the current round of hostilities that we are witnessing? Because there's also been some concern about the attacks from the side of United States on commercial ships. In some cases, Indian sailors have been at the receiving end of those attacks.
Well, the only commercial ships that have received attention from the United States in that regard are ships whose captains didn't listen when they were told that there was a blockade in place and they should change course and go to the holding area at sea that had been established. You know, a tanker captain or a cargo ship captain should recognize not to mess with a war vessel. And what happened in the one incident, a very tragic tragically resulting in some deaths, was the captain didn't heed the warning, and we fired a shot into the engine room of the ship to disable it. So I put the responsibility on the captain. There's no desire on our part to fire on commercial vessels, unlike Iran, which makes a regular practice of it.
Right. And, you know, there's a lot of questions about uncertainty of how long this will go on, because there are many questions thrown up. One, as you rightly mentioned, what happens to the military program? And is Trump likely to take some military action to settle the issue of Iran's nuclear dust or enriched uranium, or whether there will be a more pronounced attempt at regime change in Iran?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I think Trump agreed to this ceasefire and MOU because he was concerned about gasoline prices for American consumers with an election coming up in 4 months. And the Iranians can sense that, too. They can see that Trump is reluctant to resume substantial hostilities before the election. And I think it allows them to basically to backtrack on the commitments they made to open the Strait of Hormuz up to traffic by everybody. That obviously hasn't happened, and I'd have to say in the current circumstances, it's not close to happening. That's why oil prices are going back up. And I think it reveals the basic problem inside the Iranian government, that there's no authoritative figure to say that this is the policy they're going to pursue. Even with this MOU, the Supreme Leader said that he objected to it as a matter of principle. So it gives the Revolutionary Guard the leeway they need to carry out continued attacks.
Absolutely. And Mr. Bolton, you made a very important point that each day that Iran gets to pick itself up, to pick up the pieces, to rebuild its infrastructure, its manufacturing capabilities, its military capabilities, and its arsenal, are we supposed to believe President Trump when he says that Iran has lost everything and it might not be in a position to sustain a conflict for too long. Where would you stand on that?
Well, it hasn't lost anything. I would say, unfortunately, I think the attacks stopped too soon. But there's simply no doubt, as in the case of the aftermath of the 25 attacks on Iran's nuclear program, the day after the attacks ended, they began to try and dig out and indeed expand new facilities that had only recently been discovered, which is why, in my view, which I've held for a long period of time, there really isn't any answer here. There's no long-term peace and stability until the regime itself is replaced.
Right. There's also the question of Israel, which was never completely on board with these peace negotiations. Now, is it not complaining about being given an opportunity to resume what it wasn't able to finish in Lebanon in particular? How do you see Israel's role as far as this conflict is concerned?
Look, I think the existential threat to Israel posed by Hezbollah remains, and I think Israel's acutely aware of it. I think there have been significant positive developments, an agreement reached by the government of Lebanon and the government of Israel, something that hasn't happened in decades, that the government of Lebanon has agreed to Israeli troops staying in Lebanon to keep Hezbollah from attacking Israelis. So this is cooperation between the legitimate government of Lebanon and Israel against what is really their common enemy, Hezbollah. I hope that continues.
Right. And we also spoke earlier about Trump suing for peace because his approval ratings were not the best at the home front. You referred to the midterm elections as well. But what kind of impact do you see this new round of hostilities having in the build-up to the midterms? Do you think that he's able to convince the American public that he's tried his best to push for peace, but Iran didn't comply? And are the people of the United States going to buy that?
Well, I think Trump could make that case. I think he has failed to make it really since February the 28th when he announced the attacks. I think it would have been more responsible in the months preceding it to make the case why Iran had to be dealt with, not to talk about the specifics of the military operation, but to make the case that U.S. interest and really the interest of the world economy couldn't be held hostage by Iran's nuclear and terrorist threats. Now, it's not too late for the president to make that case. Whether he's prepared to try with the elections looming or not, I don't know. He's in a very bad position, really, by mistakes he himself has committed.
Right. And Mr. Bolton, do you see Trump revisiting his pivot towards Pakistan? Because I'm asking you this in context of this war and Pakistan's role in the mediation process. Was he too trusting of Pakistan's role? And what do you think his strategists should be telling him?
Well, I think his negotiators were telling him a deal is close, a deal is going to happen. Iran will talk about the nuclear programs, and it's clear we can see in hindsight that was never going to happen. In part here, people should understand the role of the mediator is really is critical. The U.S. is not basically talking directly to Iran. It talks to the mediators talk to Iran, Iran talks to the mediators come back to the U.S. You know, sometimes this is called proximity diplomacy. Sometimes it's important to go that way. Frankly, in my own experience, it never works that well until you finally sit down with your opposite number at the table and talk to them directly.
And Mr. Bolton, let me also ask you about NATO. It seemed like Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, was trying his best to convey to Donald Trump that NATO did provide logistical support during the war, be it the use of bases for refueling, etc. But in this second round of hostilities, do you see the possibility of a more substantive role, or Trump perhaps putting more pressure on NATO allies to be more participatory than they've been in the past?
Well, I think it's possible there will be greater participation by European members of NATO. The leaders at the summit did make critical remarks about Iran's performance under the MOU. I think there's increasing awareness in Europe that they do have a stake in this war. They're not bystanders. The NATO leaders just met in Turkey, a NATO member which has a border with Iran. So it's very proximate to their interest. I thought the summit overall turned out quite well, certainly from the perspective of Ukraine, and I think it could have implications for Iran too.
Right. Let me also draw you out a bit, Mr. Bolton, on the Chinese calculations. Now, they've fired a long-range ballistic missile in the Pacific Ocean, and this has countries in the Indo-Pacific speak out against China's actions. Trump and Xi did meet recently, but how do you read China's recent muscle flexing?
Well, I think they feel very secure. I think that's unfortunate, but let's be clear. China has aspirations all along its periphery in the Indo-Pacific to achieve hegemony regionally and then I think ultimately worldwide. So these kinds of missile launchers are signals to their neighbors along their periphery, but really to the wider world that they plan to do exactly that. And I think that's why it's incumbent on all of us who are worried about these Chinese hegemonic aspirations to talk about strategically what we need to do in response.
Absolutely. And Trump has also said that Ukraine will now get a license to produce Patriot missiles. Are we we're, of course, at a situation more than 4.5 years into the war between Russia and Ukraine. How do you look at Trump's calculations here?
Well, I think everybody was surprised by it. We'll see if it actually comes through, but Patriots are probably the best air defense missile in the world today. Licensing the technology is a critical step, and I think there's a lot of details to be worked out, but it's the strongest move by Trump in support of Ukraine, I think, in his entire second term.
Right. And lastly, Prime Minister Modi has recently been to Indonesia. He's concluding his visit to Australia as we speak, and then he proceeds to New Zealand. He's met the Japanese Prime Minister in India recently, and this is also happening at a time when Trump has decided to drop Indo from the Indo-Pacific Command. What message is this sending out? And I'm asking you this because many believe that the Quad, which includes India, US, Japan and Australia, is losing its teeth because America does not seem to be very interested. Is this true?
Well, with Trump, you never can tell. I think the Quad's a potentially extremely important mechanism to have coordination among key countries in the region. I think the decision to drop Indo and go back to the Pacific Command is a mistake. The whole point of naming it the Indo-Pacific Command in Trump's first term was to recognize the reality and particularly the extent of the Chinese threat, not just in the Pacific, but in South Asia as well. So I hope that gets corrected, and I think in Congress you'd see overwhelming support to do that, and also to use the Quad more effectively and to think of other ways in which India in particular can cooperate with some of the Pacific and East Asian states.
All right, Mr. John Bolton, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now.
Glad to be with you.